We'll get started shortly. We're just going to give folks a minute or two to continue to join the session. Number of attendees is going up quite fast. So I think, Margaret, if you are okay, we'll jump in and start.
Excellent. Thank you, Bia. Thank you, Zoe. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margaret Drent, and I'm the Registrar and CEO of the College of Audiologists and Speech Language Pathologists of Ontario. And together with my colleague, Bia Rana, who is CASLPO's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator, I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, and we're also really happy about the fact that we had such strong interest from the registrant community in this program. As you are no doubt aware, June is National Indigenous History Month, and this is a time when we recognize the rich history, heritage, resilience, and diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across Canada. This month also provides an opportunity for all of us to reflect on the role that each of us can play in addressing health inequalities and supporting Indigenous patients throughout Ontario. And today we're also very pleased to welcome accomplished CASLPO registrant and speech language pathologist Zoe Higgins for the latest installment of CASLPO's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webinar series. And our title for today, as you can see from the slide, is Culturally Competent Care Provision in Action. This afternoon, Zoe is going to introduce us to Ezhi-gkendaagziyang, which is an Anishinaabemowin word, which means how we learn. And as Zoe explains, this tool was inspired by the idea of supporting each child's growth and learning in a way that suits them best. I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about Zoe. In addition to completing a master's in health science from the University of Ottawa, Zoe has also completed her PhD in the Rural and Northern Health Program at Laurentian University. So the tool that we're going to learn about more today was created by Zoe in partnership with the community of the Dokis First Nation, and it is a culturally and linguistically informed communication assessment process. It was designed for use with kindergarten-age Anishinaabek children in the Dokis First Nation, and it is also adaptable to other First Nation, Inuit, and Métis contexts. This tool provides a flexible framework that emphasizes relationship building and community collaboration to identify strengths and needs. So I'm now going to turn this over to Bia Rana, our DEI coordinator, for a few preliminary comments, and then after that, we will be turning the floor over to Zoe.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
To our attendees, if possible, please close all other running applications to improve your connection on today's platform. If you experience technical issues during the session, please exit and log back into the session. And if that does not resolve your issue, please contact us at dei@caslpo.com and we will do our best to assist you. Registrants can access a recording of this webinar, which will be made available in the coming week via the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion eForum series page on CASLPO's website. And viewing of this session can be counted towards your self-assessment tool learning goals. We have saved time for questions at the end of the session, so please submit your questions as they pop up using the Q&A feature on your screens. You do not have to wait until the end to submit your questions. CASLPO staff will be monitoring all questions and comments throughout today's session, and we will do our absolute best to address as many of these as possible. If we cannot get to your question today, we will respond to you via email in the coming week. And with those items covered, we turn it over to Zoe.
Hello, Ani, bonjour, Zoe Higgins, Shikudimi Ndanjaba, Sudbury Ndunda. I'm a non-Indigenous speech language pathologist, and as Margaret said, I just defended my PhD recently. And I'd like to start by sharing a land acknowledgement. So I work in the community of Dokis First Nation, and I will be introducing you to them in a moment, as well as I live in the community of the traditional lands of the Anishinaabek. And I want to introduce you to a tool if you don't know about it. If you do, yay. Nativeland.ca. It's a great resource. I find it very interesting to find out about the different languages and the people in the different areas that you can live, that you may live. And for example, I screenshotted for where I live in Sudbury, and you can see that there are many different communities and languages that are present here. So for the presentation today, I'm going to talk to you a bit about our team and then about the Ezhi-gkendaagziyang, which is the tool or assessment process that we've created. I am generally a person that likes to do things interactively, but I know with this format it's a little different. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to give you some moments to pause, and either if you're by yourself, just kind of reflect on what you would do in this situation, or if you're with a group, just talk amongst yourselves and throw ideas around. So I'll try and give little pauses for that. And again, if I don't answer a question that you have, please ask it at the end. If we don't get to it, we will get back to you. So first of all, our team. So this process came out from me, who's for part of my PhD. So I'm a first generation Canadian settler, and my parents are from Hungary and Europe. And I think there's a couple of pictures of me in this that you will see from when I was little. And then I did this work in partnership with the community of Dokis First Nation, where I work. And for the last 8 years, I've worked there. It's an Anishinaabek community along the French River that's around an hour and a half from both Sudbury and North Bay, and has around 200 residents regularly. As well, this is a picture of the community center. And specifically, that was informed, the creation of this tool was a committee in the community that was comprised of Lois, Chris, Pamela, and Charlene, who are community members as well as band council members who helped inform a lot of this research. So first I want to talk, we're going to be talking about services with and for Indigenous communities. And I want to make it clear that I'm not here to share to you about our culture as a non-Indigenous person. I'm just here to share with you different ways that you can explore the culture to better serve First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and especially their families. And a lot of this is talking about when you're going into First Nations communities. And I will say First Nations communities because that is the population I'm working with, but please also think about how this can apply to other populations that you're working with as well. So when I got out of grad school in 2013 and I moved from Ottawa right up to the north of Ontario, I was really going from this fast-paced world where I was taught, this is the book way you do your assessments. And really what happened is I kind of completely had to shift gears, and I was a little stuck, kind of a deer in the headlight. And so this is kind of an example of, I don't know how you guys have experienced when you've gone into First Nations communities for the first time. Like for me, it was also discovering that I had to go to some communities by plane, which was a very new experience. And so just going to give you a moment to, if you're with some people, just share kind of, do you have experience working in First Nations communities, or is this something new for you? And very short pause. And kind of one of the things that triggered me wanting to do this research was really just seeing all these words being thrown around: cultural humility, cultural safety. And it's something that I found could be quite difficult to really understand what we can do. So this is what I'm hoping this resource is available will help people better understand these concepts and how they can apply them in their practices. And this is something to think about. Do you have confidence levels? Like, this could just be a me problem, but I think it's pretty widespread that we hear these messages from the college, from SAC, about how we need to be culturally competent, but it can be quite difficult to navigate. And if you're like me, when I first started, bit of a deer in the headlight moment where I wasn't really sure what to do. So this resource is hopefully in place to help people not have that moment. So I think this is pretty universal. We do not need to contest this, that assessments must be valid, reliable, and appropriate for the linguistic and cultural backgrounds of the children we serve as speech pathologists. However, what we're seeing is that the tools that we're using, which is these standardized tools, are actually not relevant. for these populations, and using them unadapted actually risks misdiagnosing children with disorders, violating our professional standards that say we need to adapt our assessments, as well as perpetuating systemic inequities by over-identifying or unidentifying children in need, as well as pathologizing dialect differences. So this is where we have the Ezhi-gkendaagziyang, which is an assessment process that is meant to guide especially new clinicians or people that are new to working in First Nations communities on ways they can research and ways that they can approach communities in a way that might be more culturally in line with the values in the communities. However, every community, every person is different. So this is why it's a guide and a process so that you can use this and apply it and adapt it with people in the community you're working in to really make it appropriate for that community. As well, the reason why it has the name Ezhi-gkendaagziyang, which was given by a language holder and artist in the community, Alex Dokis, meaning how we learn, because he felt that this tool is really a representation of how children learn. And like in the image, we are just, we are like the roots of the child, of supporting a child, like their family, their school, everyone. And we're just along with them with the journey as they're going through their life. So that's our role, is supporting them and being their strong roots. And of course, pronounced Ezhi-gkendaagziyang in the wonderful IPA that we all know and love as SLPs. So this process came out from my PhD research. So I'm going to do a quick overview, but not go into details. If you do want to know more about the research, you can contact me. There's also some of the articles have already been published. So first, which is really important, and you'll see when we talk about the tool, that building relationships is really important. So that first year before we started talking about research, we were just getting to know each other, me as the SLP in the community, and the community just sharing about themselves with me. Then in 2019, we decided to partner. Then the different steps that led to the research, the ultimate tool, is we did a literature review to look at what the research was saying was the best practices when working in assessment with First Nations communities, and then did some focus groups locally, which ended up creating our tool, and then we also worked on validating it. So what came out from that literature review was that we had to expand it. So it wasn't just First Nations communities. We were looking at Indigenous communities because there wasn't enough research to be able to do a literature review with just First Nations. And what we found that in general, the research is suggesting to have a culturally and linguistically relevant assessment of an Indigenous child, you need to use a variety of resources. So not just going in with your one test, but using a variety of different approaches, as well using alternative approaches, which would mean things like observation, dynamic assessment, language sampling, those kinds of elements. As well, it was really important that the content of the assessment tools, as well as the environment that you're in, has to be authentic and culturally relevant to what the child is experiencing. And finally, most researchers said that, of course, taking into account the child's linguistic characteristics is very important. For example, if they are bilingual, we need to be assessing in 2 languages. And do we have the capability to assess in that Indigenous language? As well, when we're talking with dialect speakers, they will be using different words that are not necessarily bad, but our conventional assessments may mislabel these items, which we will be going into. So then I took this information and I brought it to the community of Dokis First Nation, and I asked them, what are their priorities for an assessment of a child that's entering JK? And it actually turned out to be completely different from what I was anticipating. I was anticipating more comments about the tools we were using and what we were assessing, and instead it was more about the SLP. It was about how the SLP can be and how they can act. So for example, learning more about who they are. So when you go to a community, taking the time to actually learn about the people and everything about the individuals that, different from this First Nation is different from the general society, but then also each individual person. And as part of that, respecting and promoting the values. So making sure that we're using holistic approaches, making sure that we're introducing, yes, materials that the children are familiar with, which may involve, incorporating Indigenous languages into our assessment processes as well. The next aspect they really highlighted was really prioritizing people. So they really wanted us to remember as clinicians coming in that we're not the center. You know, we might come in with the idea of I'm coming in, I have to identify, whereas what they're saying is come slowly, and then slowly, once you have a relationship, then you start assessing, and then slowly more, and making it functional. So that means making sure that you're not just doing abstract, standardized. I will be bashing on the SELF P3 today, I'm sorry, but that was used in our research to compare, and so it's very strict, whereas they're looking at something that's more flexible, that reflects real life and what these children are experiencing. And really, in one of the words of one of our participants was, and sometimes because there's not that rapport, I don't know how authentic the visits are. Because if you don't have that rapport, you're not going to get a child to want to interact with you and want to participate and communicate. So what we did is we then took this information from the both sources and brought it together. So taking those Western sources that were looking at the materials and the approaches, and then the community priorities, which were more the relationship-based ones. And realizing that, myself and the members of the advisory committee realized there wasn't a tool we could adapt. So that's why we decided to build the Ezhi-gkendaagziyang for assessing children in this community in a way that the community wanted. And as you can see, I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a guide that's going to take you through before you even go to the community to after you've done your assessment and you're sharing the results and goal setting with a family. And so this is where we start, is really that relationship building. Because building respectful relationships is how we learn, how we build trust, and then how we can interact better with the community members. And this was really brought out from the focus group discussions and also my experiences of working in communities. Overall, I'm going to be spending more of this presentation time today in this area, just because I think it applies more broadly and to not just SLPs that we have here, but we have audiologists as well as other clinicians. And the end part, which is more SLP focused, I can always go into more detail with other people at another time if you'd like. So the first part, and this is why I asked you instead of slides to just have the booklet available, is this this cultural and linguistic checklist. And this is where before you go to your visit, you can kind of learn a little bit more about the community. And not just about the community, but in general about, this is someone assuming that you've never, maybe you're a newcomer to Canada and you don't know about the history of First Nations people. That would be where you would want to start doing some research so that you can go in with some knowledge, so you're not constantly asking people to be teaching us. So this is where I would ask you to brainstorm with the people in your area. Is where do you think you could find this kind of information? We're talking about, the historical and current contexts of First Nations people, and then also their traditional systems and values. I'll leave you to brainstorm for 30 seconds. Okay, so I'll assume you guys came up with some amazing answers that you're all jotting down. And so I'm going to share some of my general resources. So as always, it's very important to not look at doing anything that is pan-Indigenous, which would mean, taking information from maybe the West Coast and trying to apply it to a community in Ontario, where I am. But what you can do is you can take some of the information from these different sources and with your clinical judgment, apply it to your situation. So for example, I find these are some good sources that talk about cultural safety, and there is the SAC resources about health services with Indigenous people, and some important reports like the Truth and Reconciliation Report, as well as some sources. So these are ones that you will get shared in the chat, just so for your own information, you can look them up. I also like to look at less formal sources. So for example, websites. If I want to know, maybe, I'm going to Dokis First Nation, I'm going to Google them and see what information is available. Getting books as well. So these are a few that I quite like that talk about certain cultural elements. If you're looking for certain types of books, I find a resource that can be quite good is goodminds.com, because they have a lot of resources in English, but also in various Indigenous languages as well. Another source is going to friendship centers and Indigenous health centers, either the websites or in person if that's an option. And so these are just different ways that you can learn. The next element is more about how can you learn about this specific community. So now you've gone in, you learn, you know a little bit more about the history, you know a bit about the current context, and now you want to know about the community. So this is where I would say you're going to go online and Google it. So I've done an example here in my wonderful handwriting of things I filled out when I was researching the community I was working in. So what did I do? I went to their website, I found a book that had been uploaded, and I found a YouTube video. So I found some really good resources, and that helped me learn how to pronounce the name, kind of a bit more about the environment, what they're close to, who lives there, the language, the people in leadership, and the services. So that gave me a bit of an idea so that when I go into the community, I'm not coming in with nothing and asking to be taught. I'm coming in going, I learned about that there's a museum. I would love to visit the museum. So that's how you can start conversations. The next big one to talk about is the idea of language differences. So in many First Nations communities, and I'm talking a lot from my experiences working in Ontario, but from the research and from talking to people, this feels like this is a situation you see across Canada where the language that is spoken is not the standard language levels that you would expect in like Toronto. So we're seeing many different language elements, and that is influencing how they speak. And so when you think about it, especially for speech language pathologists, is if they are using different sounds, they are using different words, we don't want to pathologize something and label it as a disorder when it is not a disorder. So this is why it's important for us to learn about these dialect features and to incorporate them and their knowledge into our assessments. So I'm going to go through a little bit these different sections and how you can use it in your communities that you're working in. And I think the first one to understand is also why are there these differences? So the reasons when we're looking at, for example, semantics, I think it's pretty common that across Canada, there'll be people using different words in different areas. My example in Ontario is if you're in the south, they'll say they're going to go to their cottage, and in the north, you go to camp. And it's the same concept, it's just a different word. So you'll see lots of those in different communities. And this is where in the booklet, you'll just see the short little version. And in the guidebook, you'll see more of an explanation and where, like in which communities this has been observed. So this is kind of a big form that can be used with many, many different populations. The idea is that you would go into the guidebook and go and look at, okay, I'm working in a community that is, Northeastern Ontario. I might go through and highlight the different ones that I might see in Northeastern Ontario, so I have an idea. And then, spoiler for later in the presentation, when you go to the community, you can talk to people. And a lot of them, once you give the examples, they'll be like, oh yeah, everyone says that here, or no one says that here. So you'll be able to start those conversations. And when we're talking about it, there's two kind of reasons we're seeing it. One of them is community influence. So a lot of these communities are geographically isolated, and in any community that is not as surrounded, you will see different words, different types of formulations happening. And then the other thing you can see is because of heritage language influence. So what we see for some of these elements is that because the language is different and has been traditionally spoken, we've seen certain changes. Like, for example, omitted markers for superlatives, because for Coast Salish people, just like in some of the other Indigenous languages as well, it marks grammar differently. So that's why you might be seeing this crossover. And of course, where you would distinguish between, is it a dialect feature or is it just someone speaks differently in the community? That's why you need to go in and hear people and talk to people to really understand those elements. The next section is a big one. It's morphosyntax. The elements, I'm not going to go through everything, obviously, but I did want to give an example of when I said I was highlighting all the different areas. This is one that I did for my area, which was working with children in Northeastern Ontario. So I looked it up and I was like, okay, so I'm expecting some of these differences when I go into the community. And when I look at it, if in the guidebook, I do expand on some examples from Anishinaabemowin, as for example, like function words in English, such as they're not separate in Anishinaabemowin. That's not how the language works. So it's polysynthetic. So therefore, you're going to see that sometimes in the dialect in the community. We're also going to see sound differences. I think this one is pretty common and more understood, a bit like with a lot of Francophones that are learning English. They'll have problems, or not problems, but they will have difficulties producing the TH sound because it's not one present in their language, French. Similar, a lot of communities will have certain sounds that aren't present. Like for example, in Anishinaabemowin, if I look at this, I could see there's no voiced and voiceless contrasts, which I think is something that a lot of people have noticed. So you might have that come in to when they're speaking in English. Because for example, depending on the community, sometimes it's gokum, kokum, but it's the same thing. It's just that the no voiced, voiceless contrast. As well, the TH is another one that is often not present. As well, another big element, and I think this applies to audiology, SLP, anyone, especially when we're looking at pragmatics. Even if we're not assessing pragmatics, it's how we interact with people. And what we're seeing here is that there are some differences. I'm not going to go into huge details on what the differences are today, but if we have time at the end and there's questions, we can look into them. But in general, I think it's important to know that there are differences in communication styles that if you misinterpret them, may seem as a person is rude or not listening. Like for example, may not seem talkative, because in certain communities, listening is very valued. So you don't just jump in, you have to wait and listen. And if someone doesn't know that, they might be sitting there going, I'm getting impatient. So that's why it's important to know. Another element, of course, is literacy. This is another more maybe for the SLPs. Sorry, got sidetracked. I had questions coming in. And so it's just really important to know that, if you're seeing some differences verbally, you might be seeing them reflected in written and reading. I want you guys to reflect for a second, because I know that not all of you are SLPs. Especially if you're not an SLP, I want you to reflect for a second on what you could, how you could apply this to your field, like for an audiologist, or if you're a psychologist. So I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds, and then I'll give a couple of my ideas, and then maybe we can discuss it at the end. Like with many SLPs, I'm not good with waiting quietly. So I'll assume everyone had a great chat again. So hopefully you'll be able to talk about, there's certain elements such as social communication differences, those communication patterns, but also when I'm thinking about specifically audiology, it'd be important to know, just as if a child, if they are not saying their S's, is it because they can't hear, maybe they don't have the grammar, or is it something that in this specific position they're not using as a dialect feature? So being able to really parse those out, I think, could be quite useful. And then the last element of this cultural and linguistic checklist is really just making sure that you've thought about the cultural, local, and personal relevance of the materials, amongst other elements. So your physical environment, where are you going to be assessing? What kind of materials are you going to be using? And the content of them, is it appropriate for them? As well as the different activities in your approach. So it's really just trying to get you to think about, have you thought about these different elements? Because sometimes we don't necessarily think like, oh, my assessment tools, or I have a play set and it's great, and I have all my Playmobil people, but just that little element of this happened to be where I stopped and I realized, I'm like, all my little Playmobil people are white. And I was like, that's not representative. So I've made sure to go and find, Playmobil characters of different colors, of different hair colors, just everything different, so that they can choose who they want to play with, and it's not something that I'm dictating. And again, that's something that hopefully during the Q&A we can kind of expand on a little bit more at the end. And again, it's always important to just be relevant to the child's experiences. This is where the next steps are going to help us learn more how to tailor our assessment. So this is when you would actually go to the community. So our next step is going to the community. And for me, this is actually the drive to Dokis First Nation. I quite like it. It's in the winter, it can be a little slippery, but I know a lot of people that have worked in many First Nations communities and know the long drive. But you get to see, as I showed you guys earlier, fun things like wildlife along the way. And then this is where you would go into the community and you would want to start building those relationships. So try meeting people. I always say the ideal would be to say, I'm going to have a half day or even a whole day, and I'm going to go to the community. I'm going to meet with the principal at the school. They're going to take me for a tour of the school. I'm going to get a tour of the community. I'm going to meet some elders. All this sounds amazing. And I know in reality, the chances of this happening are very slim because there's a lot of tight timelines and everything is always go, go, go. But the important is to slow down and try and take that time. So this is where people have talked to me about like, well, what do you recommend is the best amount of time to spend? Again, I think a day would be perfect. You're not going to know everything even after a year. But what I think is important is to take that time. So even if, you're like, okay, I only have half an hour. What can I do? Well, I'll take that half hour to say, you know what, let's do a quick driving tour of the community. And then I want to take that time to walk around and talk to people. So just trying to make sure that you have that time to get to meet with people. And what's great is that you can bring that list, the cultural checklist that you've already filled out, and use that as a basis of information and ask people, I found out this information. Can you tell me more about it? So this is, again, just to start those conversations so that you can get going and learn more. For example, this is what I kind of filled out, the information after I had talked to people in the community. Of course, this was after, I've known them for a few years, but this might be hard. You can still get this in a conversation. So I learned more of like, oh, I wrote the name right. I said it right. Learned a bit more about the dialects in the community. And then I learned a little bit more about the school, where the children go from middle school, high school. I learned how to pronounce the school as Ezhi-gkendaagziyang. And then also learned a bit more about what, people like to do in the community. For example, hunting, fishing. So I can think, and it does help later. I have a kid who loves fishing. So we make sure we always have fishing materials in our play. And then the other element is you can also confirm those dialect features. So just from talking to people, you'll be able to pick up on certain features, but you can also talk to someone and just say like, you know what, do you find that people here do say the TH sound or don't say the TH sound? So you can kind of, gauge it and have that conversation. The next step now is where you're looking more at assessing the child. So now you've learned more about the culture and you learned more about the community and the people that live there. So the next step is to say, okay, I'm thinking about assessing this child now. And this was really what we were from that scoping literature review saying you want to gather information from different people and different sources. So we're going to have conversations with caregivers, educators. We're going to observe the child and do some videotaped play assessment visits. And this is, again, this part is a guide. So these are all conversation guides, and it does say in the corner, don't use direct questioning. So when I was talking to people in the community, that was in this community of Dokis First Nation, that is something that is not desired. They do not like being questioned. People have mentioned it feeling like they're just back up against the wall. So this is more of you want to just have an informal conversation where I want to learn more about you and you can learn more about me. What are my values as well? And then there's some questions to kind of help you. I think any SLP that once they have lots of experience, knows the questions they like to ask. But this is, again, to help people that may not have as much experience. Like, for example, asking about the child's strengths, their interests, also their difficulties. Do the parents have any concerns? Or is there something that they want the child to do more independently? So these kinds of questions. One of the important ones that we did consult with the language teacher at the school was asking about culture, because some communities and some families are not interested in cultural elements and some are. And I think it's very important to not just paint a brush and say everyone wants it, but it's important to ask, for example, how culturally involved is your family? Because if you're more culturally involved, I will be making an effort to incorporate that into my sessions, but I want to respect the families and what they would like. The only difference between the caregiver and the educator guide is really with the educator guide, you're already setting up to when you're going to come in and observe in the classroom. So this would be, for me, I would do this before I meet the child. I want to meet the parents. I want to just chat with them, get to know more about this kid. And then when you're also with the educator, you can say, okay, I want to come and observe them. When's a good time for me to come in? And really not just coming in blazing saying, I'm coming in, I'm assessing on this day. People will just take a step back. It's really saying, okay, when's a good time? And then just going into the classroom and just seeing how things are, which is jumping into the next section, which is the observation. So this was really highlighted by community members as important because they felt like it gave the children kind of a way to know the SLP a little bit more, or the clinician coming in, as less of a scary stranger. Because the person was in the room, they were introduced by the teacher, and oftentimes it's a JKSK classroom, so even if they're doing centers, I find they'll come and include me, so children will come and chit chat at me, and I find that's a great time for me to be able to jot down some notes for what I'm wanting to do when we're in our one-on-one session, and also lets me see how they're interacting with the other kiddos in the environment. So there, where we have here is place for notes, as well as ideas for your play assessment visit. Normally I give you some brainstorming time, but I'm going to be rude and move forward. But for example, some things that I might write down, which is like, oh, he asked me a really good question, so I'm just going to jot that down. This child has difficulty sitting at their desk. They've got a lot of energy. So then my thought immediately when I'm thinking about my assessment visit is, okay, these are specific items for myself. I'm like, I'm going to bring my lily pads because that's a jumping activity. I'm going to bring our jungle carpet so that we're playing on the ground, so that I'm trying to tailor it so that it's going to be the most successful for this child. And then, mom said he likes Paw Patrol, so I'll make sure that I got some Paw Patrol with me as well. So this is just really setting yourself up. And this, I generally do 30-minute observation. If I have more than one kiddo in the class that I'm going to be working with, like it's happened before in the community that I was asked to assess, 6 out of the 8 kids that are there, I'm going to spend a little longer in the observation time just because I'm trying to see more than one kiddo at the same time. Sorry, I did not mention something I do think is important, which is hearing screening and oral motor screening. So the research has shown that First Nations children are more prone to otitis media. And there are many, many factors involved in this that I will not go into, but I think that's why it's very important to highlight that we have done a hearing screening, that we are checking that element. As speech pathologists and as audiologists, I think you already know this, and as they're coming to you to check their hearing, you will be doing their hearing screening. And then the other element is oral motor screening. So that is looking again, how are things going on the oral motor perspective. That's not something that's specific to First Nations children. That is something that we should be doing with all of the children that we're seeing. So it's just putting it in there as a reminder. So now that observation period is done, you're ready to see the child. This is when what our research shows that we were doing 2 visits. So you'll have 2 30-minute visits where you're just going to sit and play with the kiddo, planned playing, and you're going to record it. And afterwards, in step 3 is when you're actually going to go through it and do your check marks and checking to see the developmental skills. This was chosen because in the community, what was really highlighted was they wanted something natural. They didn't like as much the whole sit down with the book and we're going to flip and it's going to be very standardized. They wanted something that looked like what children are experiencing on their day-to-day. So something a little bit more fun and relaxed. And part of that involves not having someone who is writing down everything you're saying. So that's why the recording is to kind of liberate or free you from that. And as you can see in the back here, this picture, there is a laptop. I find the kiddos when I set it up and I say, I'm going to be recording. And then I just put it, make sure it's blank. We always get a cute little video of them making little silly faces, and then they ignore it for the rest of the time. So I find it's really not a distractor. And it's very helpful afterwards being able to go through those recordings and not only hear what the children are doing, but seeing things that sometimes I'm like, oh, I was looking down and they did something that was really good and I want to note that. So this is where there's that assessment piece. The other idea is that we did 2 visits, because when talking to people in the community, they're like, 1 visit, it's not enough to get to know a kid. That first visit, they're just kind of getting to know you, you're getting to know them. And then usually by the second, sometimes third visit is when they're going to open up and you're going to like learn more about them and hear how they communicate. So that's why we have the 2 visits. It's also, though not officially part of the process, this is also where you can think about doing some dynamic assessment elements, such as maybe after your first visit, you noted difficulties in a certain area. Well, at your next visit, you can kind of explore that further, or you can try and do a test, teach retest element. So you can play with it. There is some sections for notes. I don't recommend sitting down and writing like as if you were trying to like write down everything the kiddo's saying. To me, it's more of a spot where I can highlight important notes to myself to remember. I wrote a little note about articulation, and these are, of course, I cleaned up versions of the ones that I used that I've used with children, and does not like coloring. So I wrote that down so I'd remember next time, don't bring out the coloring. And then it kind of gives me ideas for visit 2. Really liked animals, bring my forest animals. Pay attention to the V sound next time. So it kind of just primes you for your next visit so that your next visit's going to be even smoother. So as part of that at the top, you'll see that there's this section on the elicitation checklist. So this is because it's important to gather information, especially from a language sample, from different environments. So this is where I'm going to give you guys a couple of seconds to just think about different like how can you get information for these different areas through play only, like without having to bring out an assessment booklet. Okay, so again, you've all had wonderful discussions. So this is where I think we can get a lot from, again, just playing. You can get conversation, you can get their play skills, exposition. They will often just, tell you what they're doing. For the narrative, what I really like doing, and we have included this as part of the assessment. So the last page, you can just rip it off. And this will help you reach those last 2 goals, which is I ask the kiddos to draw me a story. And then I ask them to write their name. And then through that, we're also going to be asking some phonological awareness questions. And it also helps me see how are they from a narrative, element. I find, and I'll show you some pictures from the kiddos, you get some great pictures and you also hear really great language. And so these are ones where, in the bottom right, it's a girl that got to draw me pictures of her 2 friends, and they were going to go out into the garden and pick flowers. So I got this great language sample, and she had an amazing time drawing the picture and telling me about it. And this, when we were doing our testing, we compared it to the CASLPO story retell activity, which is the little boy who spills some juice. And we found overall that there was better participation. We got equal amount of information, but we had better participation from the kids. Like when we were doing the retell, I get a lot more like, no, I don't want to, it's hard, and you're pushing them. Whereas this one, it was very exciting. There is the caveat that not all kids like to draw, and so I'm not going to make them draw a picture if they don't want to. So for those kiddos, what I do is that I know at some point we're going to be playing, and so I'm going to try and prompt them to get a narrative while we're playing, and then I'll just use that as my narrative sample. So our next step is the analysis using checklists, and then our goal setting with caregivers. So this is when you're going to sit down at your computer, and it seems like it might take a long time, but honestly, the first couple of times I did it, it was a little longer because I wasn't as sure. But once you get to know the form a little, it goes so much quicker because you know what you're listening for. And so you would sit down, you're going to watch the video, the recordings of the kiddos. Then you're going to pull out your checklists that are at the end of the booklet, and you're going to take out your completed cultural and linguistic checklist. So all those items together, you're going to sit down and watch the videos and complete the observed elements on the communication checklist. So this is, again, the part that's maybe more just for SLPs, so I won't go into too much detail. But this is where you would say, okay, you know, what spatial concepts did I hear? This is an example of, this is nothing formal. I'm the type of person, sometimes I'm circling, sometimes I'm writing words, sometimes I'm writing whole sentences. So it's kind of however you find it's going to be easier for you to work. The importance is just going through and saying, are you hearing it or not? Then our next step would be, okay, I've noted down what they can do. Now I'm going to say, is this, you know, emerging, delayed, or acquired? So to do this, first, this is a little example. This is a child that is 4 years, 6 months. And these are the areas that he's having some challenges with. So I'm going to look specifically at those to see, is this something that I'm expecting a child their age to be able to do? So this is where you would go into the guidebook and it would show you, I tried to color code things. I'm a color coder. And so that would show me, oh, be verbs, I'm expecting that to be acquired under 4 years old. So that at 4 years, 6 months, that he should have that acquired by now. So I'm probably gonna, you know, put a little star there, or nope, I didn't put it in. At the end of the form, it says there's a little acquired, emerged, and delayed that you can check. Delayed is not delayed, sorry. Emerging is a really, I find, a useful one where it's where like I'm hearing it a little bit, but I'm not hearing it all the way. Or for example, for this child, they have the he pronoun, but they're having difficulty with the she pronoun and they're saying her. So it's emerging, but there's still something there that we want to pay attention to. And that's where there's that contrast with the self, which is more, yes, you know, yes, there's a problem. No, there's not a problem. And it's usually only have a chance of hearing a grammatical element maybe once or twice. So in this format, you're going to hear it a lot because you have an hour of recordings with this child while they're playing and they're going to be communicating for most of it. And this is also where it's important to use that cultural and linguistic checklist, because if, you know, they're not saying the TH sound, okay, well, they're 4. We're not expecting a TH sound, bad example. But for example, like the be verbs, that actually might be a dialect feature. So what you want to do is you want to make sure, is this something that everyone in the community is using, or is it just this child? If it's just this child, it's more likely that it's going to be, you know, an actual language difficulty, versus if everyone in their environment speaks like that, we're not expecting them to know that. So when we're going to be teaching, we're going to be teaching, this is a different way of speaking, that both are acceptable, but at school we speak differently. And if you want to know a bit more about that kind of research, that actually is drawn from Dr. Charlotte Peltier's work. I think it was her 2011 publication, but she has a few. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I would look up her articles that are available for free online as well. So now you're done everything, almost, not really. So now you're going to flip back to the front of the booklet, and this is where you put your summary section. This is what you're going to use when, well, the whole booklet, but this specifically when you're going to be with the caregivers and you're going over the results. So before I go in, I like to write down what were the strengths. Like, for example, this kiddo really made sure his message was understood. He persevered. His vocabulary was really good. Intervention indicators means that he was either emerging or delayed. And so that's an area that we want to look out for and maybe do intervention depending on how this conversation goes. For this child, we clicked morphosyntax and speech sounds. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to sit with the caregiver. And what was highlighted in our research that they really liked was I actually will show excerpts of the recordings to, like, just a couple of little 1-minute snippets to the families. And that has a lot of families and other community members found that really helped the family be able to talk about either concerns or things that we're really proud of. For example, one parent, even though we'd had our initial conversation, fluency hadn't come up a lot. And then when we were watching the recordings, she was able to say, oh yeah, you know, she saw a disfluent moment and she was able to say, yeah, I forgot to mention that was something that was concerning me. So we were able to, like, because we already have that relationship and we're looking at the video, it seemed to really help bring about those conversations. So for example, in this theoretical situation, the parent might say, you know what, he has an auntie called Vanessa. So yeah, working on that V sound would be really important for us because we want him to say Auntie Vanessa. And then they didn't seem so keen on the grammar, but they're like, okay, yeah, that's important. And then they were like, no, not interrupting. He's always very interrupting. And so you're like, okay, that's something that's more that social level. We can work on that as well. And that might not have been something that I picked up on in my assessment, Hopefully I did, because I'm a wonderful clinician, but you know, now that the family has highlighted this, we know that we're going to be looking at those elements as well. And so we're collaboratively building those goals together. So that's why we're going to have that better rapport and relationship. The families understand what we're working on and why we're working on it. So I've raced through a lot of things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some adaptations, and then maybe it's a bit early, but I think we can go into kind of some of those questions as well, because I am seeing lots of great questions come in. So I want to make sure that we can answer those as well. So these are elements we can always talk to. I don't have answers for everything, but just to get you guys thinking, like, what do you do when you can't go to the community? So that's where it's thinking about, everything I'm saying is, yeah, you have to go and visit the community. That would be great. But say they're not, you know, they're coming to you in your clinic. That's, I think, where that would be that conversation of how can you learn about different things from the community while not being able to go there. Like, for example, maybe you can't go visit. So that would be, I think, where you can get those nuances. I think there's no real answer. This is where I would say, let's all brainstorm some ideas. For example, doing online research. For me, I'm also thinking about reaching out to the principal of the school, or a prominent community member, a language holder, someone that maybe the family can connect you with as a person, just to learn more about the community and the culture. I think also taking time in those moments to sit down with families and maybe share with them and say, this is what I've learned. Is this, you know, how do you want me to apply this into our therapies? And just really having those dialogues. So not just going in and being like, this is the rule, I'm doing everything. It's really being that collaborative member of the team. When I'm talking about can't get time for a visit, this has come up with lots of people saying that, you know, the funding model for the services they provide doesn't allow that. But I think it's more, what we need to do is reframe it and say, well, as part of my assessment, I have a 30-minute community visit. I'm going to observe for 30 minutes. I have to have these conversations probably around 30 minutes, and then these assessment visits. So it's kind of saying that, no, our assessment isn't just go in, do an hour in assessment and come out. It involves these other pieces, and it's actually much longer. I think a lot of that is advocacy to the upper levels that we're going to have to do. But I think especially if clinicians are talking to their employers and saying, no, we need more time, that we can start those shifts. There's also been a lot of questions about, can we use this with other languages, other cultures? I think the answer is yes. Ultimately, you have to use your judgment. Like, for example, again, this was made specifically in the community for the people in this community. But the idea that I would love is for people to take this tool and bring it with them. You know, maybe they filled out the cultural and linguistic checklist, but meeting with people and saying, no, this is a tool that's available. Is this something you guys want to see? Can we adapt it? And so just seeing and really meeting with people and talking about how you can change this tool locally. I think when it comes to different languages, that's where it's important to learn about the language in the community. So if it is a different language, what I would do is I would do the research on that Indigenous language and then see what can be applied into, you know, dialects. And regardless if it's in another Anishinaabek community, I would still want someone to do that, because just because it's been recorded in one community doesn't mean it's going to be in another one as well. So on my high horse, my message to everyone is that it's really important to build relationships. Again, like I said, work collaboratively with people and develop those culturally and linguistically relevant services. One, for example, for me, over the years, I've definitely started including more content that has, you know, Indigenous. I try and use the words in the language. Like, for example, instead of just bear, we'll say makwa. In consultation with the language teacher at the school, I've incorporated ribbon skirt teachings into the activities we're doing on appropriate days. So it's really just trying to change our practices to be more in line with what these children are experiencing and living every day. And then also embedding iterative and reciprocal practices. So it's really understanding that it's about ideally a long-term relationship. And so it's always about give and take. So it's not going in as we are the expert. It's going in as going, I know about the theory of language and development, and you know about this kiddo, you know about your culture and the way you are. And together we're going to build a process that can help us see where this kiddo's strengths are and where he might need a little push to help them. And so that is the, and then doing these practices will avoid misdiagnosis, violating our professional standards that we mentioned, and then perpetuating these inequities. So I think it's about changing how we are, and that we will be able to force change at the higher levels as well. So overall, that was the big presentation, miigwech. Now I think we can go into questions. I've been getting lots that I have not been paying attention to.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Yes, we've had lots of questions and want to thank everybody for all of your interest and participation in the session. So I'll go ahead and pose some of the questions to you, Zoe, just to let everybody know. I think we likely won't have time to tackle everything, but I think there's always the possibility that we could work on some questions and answers afterwards, and we could circulate those, and that may also be appropriate in some cases, you know, depending on the nature of the question. So the first one that I would like to pose to you, if I may, Zoe, has to do, I think, with the general topic of the use of this tool or methodology for younger children. And it's been pointed out that with preschool age children, for example, this registrant is pointing out that in most age of acquisition checklists, the baseline for most skills is at under 4 years of age. So in the case of children aged, you know, from infancy to 3, how should clinicians differentiate between normal dialectical acquisition variations and true early developmental delays?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. And so I've been, it's one of my next steps, thoughts, has been to look at, can we look at getting some developmental checklists for younger, for that preschool age? What spurred me, honestly, is that last 2 years ago, daycare opened up in the community of Dokis. And so I've been going there. And now I'm like, I see a need for me to adapt this here. I think that challenge with the checklist is, yeah, it's very real. I think that's where you would want to, because the checklists I built are drawn from a lot of common sources like the Rhea Paul textbook, as well as research that has certain areas that researchers are showing that may be more challenging for First Nations children at kindergarten start. And so that's where certain elements were included on that. I think going and pulling other tools can be really helpful. Unfortunately, that's a lot of work for clinicians to do every day, which I'll come out with a checklist soon. But that's me looking at, you know, I'm thinking of, there's Rossetti, there's even check like the Look-See, you've got NEPSI, I should remember all the terms, but so there's these different tools you can pull from. I think the general principles of the beginning still apply of how you're going to be approaching people and the style of assessment. That's where unfortunately it's going to be a bit more challenging right now, is seeing what is more developmentally appropriate. And I think, yeah, that's one of those challenges of having to use a lot more of your clinical judgment. Similarly with older children, kind of on the flip side, I think these, again, general principles can be used when it comes to checklists. Again, when you're getting more into older children, you might not be as completely play-based. Like if I'm thinking of a kid in grade 1, yes, thinking of getting grade 4, maybe I might want to add like some other elements in there as well, because I want to see how are they with desk tasks, how are they with different elements. So I think I might diversify the types of activities we're doing during our videotaped assessments. And so that might be a way to kind of modify it. And yeah, hopefully that answers a little bit. If not, please ask an extra question. We can come back to it.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Zoe. So the next question that we had were, are there specific community validated precursors for speech, language, and early literacy within Anishinaabek communities for infants and toddlers that should be added to prevent reliance on Western developmental frameworks? That may
I'm
be
just reading the
also
question
one
again.
we can reflect on, you know, and perhaps follow up.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're looking for,
that's what
I think this is a gap in research where there are so many different communities and every community is different. So I think that's a spot where we need to do some more research. I find that you can find information here and there about certain communities. I did mention Dr. Charlotte Peltier. She has done some research in Northeastern Ontario. So some of her research does talk about not precursors, but talks about, you know, features and dialect features, those kinds of elements, as well as perceptions of language and language acquisition. And as well, for more the West Coast, there is a team based out of, I think it's UBC, that does a lot of work and research in this area as well. But unfortunately, it's still a new area. I think, and some of the research that has shown, you know, certain, when you're saying precursors, I think it's, I think we can do it. So, oh, you know what? I just had to talk around a little. For the ASQ, for example. So I know the ASQ, it's a screener, but there have been validated in different communities. Like I know that there's been a validation in Mohawk communities, and I'm pretty sure there's a couple of Anishinaabek ones as well. So that might be a good one to research. And you can see the adaptations that were made. And if you're really keen on research, you can read the articles as well that talk about how they made the adaptations as well. But so far, that's the only one I know of. But if anyone knows anything else, please share.
Thank you, Zoe. The next question that we had, the registrant is asking about how your guide would work in the event that services are being provided to Indigenous patients outside of their community. For example, the possibility that you're seeing the Indigenous patient in a hospital.
And I think, so I think I did answer that one a little bit earlier on, just talking about ways that you can adapt it. So again, trying to maybe instead of saying, okay, I want to go visit the community, doing that online research, but then saying, you know what, the first 15 minutes, I'm going to sit down and chat with mom, or maybe at the end, just trying to find a time where you're going to sit down and go, I just want to talk about how life is in the community. What does your day-to-day look like? Because that can also tell you a bit more about them. So without being there and seeing things, you can kind of learn more. If you're in a multidisciplinary team, this can be kind of helpful because what I've done in the past when I've worked a lot with OTs is, you know, maybe the OT is working directly with the kiddo. I'll sit in a corner and chat with the parent, and then we can switch up so that we can not having to monopolize too much time, but we can still get to know a bit more about them. So I think just putting that, making sure when you think about your visit with your kiddo that you're like, especially the first time, I'm going to take longer, and especially go slowly because they haven't had that slow transition to meeting you. It's just you've walked in the door and people might have that you're the expert. I have to do what I'm told. Not just First Nations people. I think a lot of people, when they see someone come in that clinical setting, it changes how you are. So I think taking the time to really say, no, we're going to chat, we're going to get to know each other, and then we're going to move into the tougher stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question has to do with babies and preschoolers who do not attend daycare or junior kindergarten. And so where, for example, the infant or toddler is primarily having interactions with others in the home or as a result of multi-generational family routines. The question was, how could step 2, the data collection step, should it be methodologically altered to capture that or to take that into consideration? Or I guess, how could a clinician make that switch themselves in terms of step 2?
So in terms of step 2, I think when you're thinking about it is like, so I have, depending on the family and the community, I have done those kinds of assessments in the home. So you're getting to do that observation a little bit. When you first show up, I'll usually sit down, chat with the parent for a few minutes. If there's a sibling or something, the kiddo, you might see them playing with their siblings. So you get to still be in that environment. Not everyone's comfortable having people come into their home, which I totally understand. And in those instances, we've arranged to meet at the band office. It's a lot harder, I find, to get that relationship when you're in somewhere very warm, personal, like just a random room at the band office. But again, maybe it's going to be your first visit's going to be at the band office. And then once they know you a bit better, they're like, okay, you can come into the home. because there is that, when we know the history, I think it's very understandable that people might be more hesitant to just open up and let people come in from either the research as well as medical traumas that either have happened to them or to people in their lives. I think, yeah, it's a bar. You can still do the videotaping within the home, so that's not really that issue. I think it's more when you're thinking about that observation piece that might be more challenging. It can also be, again, that's when you would talk to, like, oh, is there kokum? Well, how does he play with kokum? And just trying to get how they interact with those other people in their lives.
Okay, great, thank you. Zoe, next question is, how do you see the applicability of this assessment process to urban First Nations communities? And more specifically, could be folks living on reserve land bordering on a municipality, or individuals who are living in urban centers?
So I think that's where I would say some of what I'm saying is guessing, because I haven't had as much experience working in those environments. And so but I do know from just my experiences being in the more northern communities that they are a bit more different. And actually saying that, I think there are some communities that are closer and further that I've worked with. I think when you're really in urban centers, it's going to be different at a certain level, because their environment is different. It might be in certain ways more aligned with what we're seeing for like the Western standards, but I think it might also be, you might see some of those more cultural elements still in there. That might be where I think it would be really important to have those conversations about culture, because you're not necessarily in that environment, and so it can be harder to find out what they want. And I think also in those environments, really sharing your knowledge is important, and saying, like, I'm coming in, I understand you're First Nations, I would like to support you as much as possible. Do you follow culture? Do you want culture involved? And they might say yes or no, and ultimately I would go with what the family wants and what is best for them. I would like to, in the future of expanding the usefulness of this process, is meeting and talking with people that are in these more urban centers or in communities adjacent to find out what the differences are. Once this happens, my goal is to have it all available on the website so that people can look at the differences that have been made, the changes that have been made, so that they can also do those changes as well in their practice.
Great, thank you. How have you found that children have responded, Zoe, to eliciting certain grammatical structures or sounds during informal observation, such as play or narrative? I guess, are
So
there
do you want to say that again?
in your
Sorry.
experience? How have you, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with children? How have they responded to when you are eliciting certain grammatical structures or sounds during informal observation, play, or narrative? Could you just maybe share a few?
I'm very, like, when I do play-based, I believe in the silly. So I find they're generally pretty good with it. Like, for example, like if I'm trying to elicit, like, do you know the first sound in a word? Well, if we're playing with cows, I can bring that out and I'll be like, oh, this is a cow. What's the first sound? Maybe we should go put him with his other friends. And so you can find ways of doing that, of just kind of putting it into the game. This might be something we're more used to, I think, for intervention, of trying to like hide our therapy goals in play, but you're kind of doing the same thing, but it's just assessment. So it's just because you're just thinking, I just want to get an idea of how this kiddo communicates. And sometimes they will say no or look at you like, I'm not answering that. And some of those kiddos towards the end, I've been like, okay, just do this for me. And then we just like do it. And so sometimes you do have to do that. Like, they're not all going to be 100% yay, let's just do it. Most of them I find don't really notice that we're working. And especially when they're drawing their picture, I often do the silly, like, oh, what's that? I forgot what that animal is, or, just to get them to interact with me. And I find generally that's not been a problem.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, Zoe, next question. Have you had experiences where there's an interpreter who's been involved in any of these interactions, or is that not something that you've come across?
A little bit, but not with formal interpretation. I've had it where like the children were bilingual, like Ojibwe English, and so we had a caregiver there, and when the kiddo would say Ojibwe words, she would translate them for us just so that we knew, what he was saying. And that was a bit more challenging because, like I said, the caregiver was in the room for that those visits, just because we didn't feel, it was myself and an OT in that situation, didn't feel like we had we were able to say, yeah, I know it's this kiddo is saying, because I didn't speak one of his languages. Um, yeah, so I haven't really worked with like full-on interpreters. I think that would be challenging. The person that asked that question, that's a really great question. I'd be very willing to like brainstorm some ideas with you. You can always just contact me directly, and then, because I think that's a brainstorming one.
Yes, no, thank you. And the registrant's pointing out, in the scenario where the interpreter is not a speech language pathologist, that's another nuance there, I think, in terms of accuracy. So that might be one for us to reflect on. Now, Zoe, do you use the video communication samples as a discussion tool with caregivers as part of the assessment protocol?
Yeah. So what I do is, once I've gone through the videos, I'll usually I'll get a couple extracts. Depends where, but I want to see something where they're kind of talking their usual way, and then maybe something where they're giving me a really good narrative. And then I just excerpt those little, like, you can either clip them out. For my research, I did do the full clipping, but you can just line it up and like write down, like go to spot 50, minute 2 or minute 5, and start the video. And I find, while we're talking, that's what I start. And my usual line for starting is like, this is how they were with me. We had fun. We did these activities. Is this how they are at home? Is this how they are? And so they'll frequently say, yes, that is, or they might be like, oh no, he's never that, quiet. He's usually jumping all over the place. So you get to know a bit more about that. I wouldn't say it's mandatory. Nothing in this process is mandatory. It's more how you feel with interacting with people. Some people are not comfortable with video. So it might be that the family says, I'm not interested. So if you're not sure, you could always ask and say, do you want to see a video excerpt of them during the assessment? And I'm specifically thinking for more communities that might be more northern, or not kind of as in the more urban centers. That might be where you might be seeing these more differences, or not wanting to see the videos. So I think it's just very important to respect that, because you don't need to show them the videos. I just think it's a little extra and kind of adds that a bit of a personal touch.
Okay, but yeah, it sounds like it's really on a case-by-case basis, depending on how you think whether that's going to help or not.
And so far, I haven't had anybody that hasn't been comfortable with videos. Because when I do my initial conversation with them, I tell them, I repeat that I'm going to be videotaping our assessments, and that I'll be watching them to be able to assess, and then afterwards I'll delete them, just so that the caregivers are really aware of what's happening, and that they know that I am videotaping, and they're okay with it.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question, how can I modify my vestibular test protocol based on gender or culture?
Ooh. I'll be honest, off the top of my head, I don't know the vestibular process, but I'm assuming it requires gender. So if something requires you to use gender, it'd be looking at, I guess, can you use gender neutral? Or is that the point? So if you say he goes to the mall and they repeat back, she goes to the mall, that might be looking, that what you might want to look at is when they're talking. So maybe taking that time, like before you go in for that assessment, listening to, especially if you know that gender is going to be an element in your assessment, to say, does the kiddo say they're he's and she's, or do they have a challenge with them? And if they have a challenge with the he's and she's, I would look at, is there that element of the test where there's the gender? Can you change, is that the important part that you're looking for? I'm not sure if it's the distinction between the h and the sh. If it is, can we get that sound distinction in another word? Can you say heat versus sheet? So that might be an element, or like obviously put it in a sentence. So that might be another way to find out if that's the specific difference you're looking for.
Okay, great. Thank you. Zoe, in your experience, have you found that kids respond to a reward?
Well, I'm a sticker SLP, but my stickers aren't dependent on you participate. Like you just get a sticker for coming to see me. So I find, yeah. So at the end of, but every therapy session, every assessment visit, they get a sticker from me. So I find kids, especially once they know me, they know. Like if I forget, they'll stop at the door and go, my sticker. So I find, yes, they do like working for a sticker. Most of them don't even notice we're working. So I'll tell them we're going to be doing some activities together. And mostly what they remember is that for that half hour, we played. So I find they're not as like pushy for like, if I'm coming to work with you, I want something. So the sticker has been less of a like, I'm working towards something, because they're just playing.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Now, Zoe, do you have any thoughts about the use of this tool with respect to adult patients? Or is that sort of outside the scope of our discussions today?
It might be a bit outside, but I think in general, the part one, the step one, definitely you can use that type of information. Especially if you're going to be working in a community and seeing lots of adults, like you're not just like, you want to take that time and instead of going to the school, you might be going to the health center. Or you might be going to, if there's an old age home, you could go there. So there are different places to modify it. And I think that can also be depending on what you're seeing your client for. If it's dysphagia, so they might not have communication challenges, then you can maybe sit down with the patient even or client and talk to them about cultural elements. If you are seeing someone because they might have had like they might have communication challenges, that might be more difficult. You can still include them, but that might be, again, you're maybe talking to the caregiver. And your contact person, instead of being the principal, might be the public health nurse or someone else in the more medical side. I think when it comes to assessing language abilities, there's some research starting to come out in this area, but it's still very new as well on how to adapt. I know that there is a PhD student in Quebec that I'm currently forgetting her name, which is bad. And she has started doing some work on doing some aphasia assessments in Indigenous languages. So that would be something to look out for as well. She was recently at SAC, so if you were there, and you can always look her up, she had a poster. But so I think it's coming, but there's not as much for when we're talking about, standards and norms. So I think that's where, when you're looking at our standard assessments, you're going to have to do a lot of, right now, judgment on, is this functional for this community and for this patient's needs? Like look at the images in the Western Aphasia Battery. If that's what you're using, are they appropriate? Or are there ones where you're like, I'm trying to think of something, like I think most of the current editions don't have anything racist in them of the different tests, but in the past there have been certain items that might be more questionable. So going through your materials and checking that, and then seeing like if you're using a test and asks you, like for any patient, if you I've used tests that are from the States and they say, oh, who's the president? I'm not expecting a Canadian to necessarily know who the president is, but I might ask them, who the prime minister is. So you can do those kinds of adaptations, I think, for the context, and just really understanding, okay, well, what has this person experienced? And then another thought, sorry, I'm talking a mile a minute today, is just that, you also have to think about, are they in English as a first language speaker, or are they, English as a second language? Do they speak a dialect? And especially, I think when you're looking at working with older adults, you're going to see more people that are English as a second language. Even though now there's a lot of kiddos that are learning the language, they're learning them simultaneously often.
There's a lot of nuances there, sounds like.
Yeah. But we'll eventually get a tool for that too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, another question from a registrant is whether the goal of this process is to have more of a formal diagnosis at the end of your inquiry, or rather to identify areas of concern.
So where the way I approach, and this can be, every SLP and clinician is a little different, is when I'm going in there, especially with JK kiddos, is I'm not looking to diagnose. So a lot of time, this is the first time they're seeing an SLP. So I'm not going to have that response to intervention. How are they over time element? So I want to just get a picture of where they're at, strengths and areas of need. And then over the year, I'm going to provide that. And then I can have a look at the end of the year, or maybe the start of the next year, and say, where are we now? And if, after a year, I'm still seeing elements that are concerning, that are not, we're working on them and they're having challenges learning these new skills, or I'm starting to question, maybe there's a developmental language disorder, I'm going to get more of a picture of the child because I've been working with them. So, and there's, on the flip side of that, is when I've been talking to families, especially in Dokis First Nation, the accent is not on diagnosis. They're not really concerned as much whether the kid has an identified disorder or not. It's more about how can we support them. And some research has shown that, like in many First Nations communities, and other Indigenous communities, the idea of diagnosis is not really wanted or desired. It's more about, my child is the way they are. This is how they and my role is just saying, how can I help this child be the best version of themselves? And sometimes, especially in these small community schools, like I work at the school, there are 20 kids in the school from JK to grade 4. We're going to know each other, and we don't need to have formal diagnoses. If we need, when they're leaving, we might say, you know what, this kiddo is in grade 4, they have challenges, we're going to do something like a formal report, and we're going to identify because of the following services. And I know that there's that big push that we want to make sure we identify children, but I think that if it's not something that's needed, and it's like for funding, we don't need to push it right at the beginning. We can say, let's just see how things go, and then after a little bit, we can always reassess what we need.
Okay, thank you. Another question, Zoe, do you have any suggestions on how to handle otitis media findings during screening? And if this is something you've come across, and how do you suggest tackling the management part if the patient or the patient's family is adverse or skeptical or aversive to medical intervention?
That can be challenging. So I've had certain conversations like that with certain families, and what I try and do is I try and highlight, like I'll have a visual of the ear, and I'll explain what's happening and how I kind of try and go from the physiological, and so there's the liquid in the ear, and so they can't hear the messages, and if they can't hear the message, they're not going to be able to reproduce it. And so sometimes it takes a few conversations of not pushing the you need to go for medical intervention, but it might be, let's start smaller. Can you go to the health center and have someone look in the ear? And this is where sometimes having support can help, because there might be, if it's a community, again, that's more isolated, talking about, you might need the medical van. If you can, in an ideal world, you can get an audiologist to come out and then see everyone in the community, but that might be challenging. I think it's really just highlighting the impacts on the child and saying, like, if we do this, then they will be able to access their world better, instead of saying, you need to do this because it's medically necessary. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Another question, and I know we're getting fairly close to the end of our time, but this registrant is pointing out that early childhood middle ear fluid fluctuations have really a critical impact between infancy and age 3. So during that 0 to 3 age bracket, when prime phonetic mapping is happening, or supposed to happen, needs to happen. Do you have any thoughts on early tracking protocols or preventative community partnerships that would be recommended for babies and toddlers? And this is, again, something as well we could take away if that's more suitable, Zoe.
Yeah. Well, no, I think I can definitely give some thoughts. I think ideally, we need to get equipment into communities and people like that can use them. I know I was quoted $8,000 to get some screening equipment. And in my small private practice of me, I'm like, that's not something I can afford. But I think larger groups or organizations, that might be something that they can integrate. I know I've worked in organizations that had SLPs in various communities. That might be something they could do, is buy this equipment and then collaborate with the community, or communities can buy it as well. It just might be expensive for each community, to say, okay, we're going to put it in place where there's going to be screening. I'm not sure how feasible it is, and this is maybe a shout out to all the audiologists. I know that oftentimes vision specialists will come in and do screenings and assist people in getting glasses, all that stuff in the community. And I think that that would be really valuable as a resource to have, as audiologists that can come to the community. We understand they can't do everything, but that they can get that the baseline ideas of how the health in the community, the hearing health, and to really promote that those early years detection. Because I think a lot of time it's lack of access. There's no one, you can't just say, I'm going to pop by next door and go get it done. It's lots of navigating.
Thank you so much, Zoe. That was fantastic. And I'm going to turn things over now to Biarana to close.
Thanks, Margaret. And thank you so much, Zoe. I can imagine that your voice needs some much needed rest by now. This was such a phenomenal session. And I'm not just speaking for myself, but I'm sure so many other attendees and Margaret, when I say that we're so deeply appreciative of you joining us today and sharing your insights and your teachings about Ezhi-gkendaagziyang. It's a tool that I feel like is such an exemplary example of culturally competent care provision in action. And as somebody who works in equity work, a lot of the times we hear about how necessary it is to have tools and processes like these, but to see one, in real time, and to have the creator of that tool join us, I think is so phenomenal. So thank you. As we close off this session, we encourage attendees to explore resources like those featured on CASLPO's DEI webpage that can support their ongoing learning and strengthen their understanding of how they can help enhance the health and well-being of Indigenous people in their own communities. Alongside a recording of today's webinar, we will be posting the resources that Zoe shared with us, so the booklet and the guide, to our CASLPO DEI webpage as well. So please be sure to check that out. Also, there will be announcements about upcoming DEI webinars in the fall, and we look forward to seeing folks who attended today again then. Thank you so much for attending. We hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.